My sister-in-law accidentally handed me my brother's coffee thermos at the family barbecue. I took a sip without thinking. My assistant manager, who used to work as a pharmacist, grabbed it from my hands and went completely white. She told me to get my brother to a hospital immediately. Why? I asked. She said she couldn't explain right now, but if I didn't act fast, my brother wouldn't make it another month. What I discovered at that hospital changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. Welcome to Martha's Stories. If you're watching this, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story travels. It was the 4th of July weekend, and our whole family had gathered at my parents' ranch just outside Austin, Texas. The air smelled like mesquite smoke and fresh-cut grass, and the sound of country music drifted from the speakers my father had set up on the porch. I had driven down from Dallas, where I run a chain of artisan bakeries that my grandmother started 40 years ago. The business had grown into something special, with 12 locations across Texas and a wholesale operation that supplied restaurants throughout the Southwest. My brother Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting in a lawn chair looking thinner than I remembered. He was 42, 3 years older than me, and had always been the healthy one in the family. He ran marathons, ate clean, never touched alcohol. But lately, every time I saw him, he seemed more tired, more pale. His wife Lauren blamed it on stress from his architecture firm, and we all believed her. Lauren was the perfect sister-in-law, or so I thought. She had married my brother 8 years ago, and from the beginning, she seemed to fit right into our family. She remembered everyone's birthdays, organized holiday gatherings, and took care of my brother with what appeared to be genuine devotion. She prepared his meals, packed his lunch every day, and made sure he took his vitamins. My mother adored her. She called Lauren the daughter she never had. That afternoon, the family was scattered around the property. My father was manning the grill, my mother was inside preparing her famous potato salad, and the kids were running around the yard playing with sparklers. I had brought my assistant manager, Nina, with me because she had become like family over the years. Nina was in her 50s, a former pharmacist who had left the medical field after burning out and found peace working in my bakery. She had a sharp eye and an even sharper mind. I was thirsty and reached for what I thought was my water bottle on the picnic table, but when I took a sip, I realized it was coffee, bitter and strange tasting. I made a face and was about to put it down when Lauren rushed over. "Oh, that's Daniel's thermos," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "I made his special coffee this morning. He likes it a certain way." I handed it back to her, thinking nothing of it. But Nina, who had been standing nearby, watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. A few minutes later, she pulled me aside near the old oak tree at the edge of the property. "Let me see that thermos," she said in a low voice. I frowned. "What? Why?" "Just trust me, Rebecca." I walked back to where Daniel was sitting. He had the thermos in his hands but hadn't drunk from it yet. I made up an excuse about wanting to try Lauren's special coffee recipe, and he handed it over with a weak smile. When I brought it to Nina, she unscrewed the lid, sniffed it, and then dipped her finger in and tasted the tiniest drop. Her face went pale. "Where did this come from?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Lauren made it for my brother. She makes his coffee every morning." "Nina, what's wrong?" She grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "You need to get your brother to a hospital right now, today. Don't let him drink any more of this." I felt my heart stop. "What are you talking about?" "I can't be completely sure without a lab test," she said. "But I spent 15 years as a pharmacist. I know what certain compounds taste like, what they smell like. There's something in this coffee that shouldn't be there. Something that could be very, very dangerous." I stared at her, unable to process what she was saying. This was Lauren we were talking about. Lauren, who brought soup to my mother when she had the flu. Lauren, who organized charity events at her church. Lauren, who loved my brother. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" I whispered. Nina looked me straight in the eyes. "I pray to God I'm wrong, but if I'm right and you do nothing, your brother might not survive." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked across the yard at Daniel, who was now talking to our father by the grill. He looked so fragile, so unlike the strong, athletic brother I had grown up with. And suddenly, all the pieces started clicking into place. The weight loss, the fatigue, the stomach problems he had been complaining about for months. We had all assumed it was stress, or some kind of virus that wouldn't go away. I made a decision in that moment. I told my parents I was taking Daniel to an urgent care clinic because he didn't look well. My mother agreed immediately, worry etched on her face. Lauren offered to come along, but I insisted she stay and help with the barbecue. I saw something flicker in her eyes, just for a second, but she smiled and nodded. On the drive to the hospital, I called ahead. Nina had given me the name of a toxicologist she knew at Del Seaton Medical Center, a colleague from her pharmacy days. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, and he agreed to meet us. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, confused but too tired to argue. "What's going on, Rebecca?" he asked. "I feel fine, just a little worn out." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "I just want to make sure everything's okay. Humor me." At the hospital, they took Daniel in for testing immediately. I handed over the thermos, which I had brought with me, and they sent it to the lab along with blood and urine samples from my brother. Then came the hardest part, the waiting. I sat in the sterile waiting room, clutching my phone, trying not to fall apart. Nina had stayed behind at the ranch to keep an eye on things and make sure Lauren didn't suspect anything. Every few minutes, she texted me updates. Lauren was acting normal, she said, helping with the food, playing with the kids, laughing at my father's jokes. After what felt like an eternity, the toxicologist, Dr. Marcus Webb, came out to see me. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a serious expression. He sat down next to me and spoke in a low voice. "Your brother has elevated levels of thallium in his system," he said. "It's a heavy metal that's colorless and odorless. It used to be used in rat poison before it was banned. Someone has been giving it to him in small doses over an extended period of time." I felt the room spin. I gripped the armrest of my chair, trying to stay upright. "How bad is it?" I managed to ask. "He's not in immediate danger, but if this had continued for a few more weeks, we'd be looking at permanent organ damage, possibly worse. The good news is, we caught it in time. We're starting treatment immediately to flush the toxin from his system." "The thermos," I said. "Was it in the thermos?" Dr. Webb nodded. "The lab confirmed it. Whoever prepared that coffee has been poisoning him." I sat there in silence, tears streaming down my face. Part of me still wanted to believe there was some other explanation, some terrible mistake, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was only one person who prepared my brother's coffee every single day. Only one person who had access to everything he consumed. I stayed at the hospital with Daniel that night. The doctors wanted to keep him for observation and begin chelation therapy to remove the thallium from his body. I told him everything, watching his face crumble as the reality set in. "She loves me," he kept saying, shaking his head. "We're trying to have a baby. She wants to start a family." I held his hand and let him cry. I didn't have any words that could make this better. The woman he had built his life with, the woman he trusted completely, had been slowly killing him. The next morning, I called Detective Arlene Foster with the Austin Police Department. I had found her name through a contact at the hospital, someone who specialized in domestic poisoning cases. When I told her what we had discovered, she was at the hospital within the hour. Detective Foster was a no-nonsense woman in her early 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She listened to my story, reviewed the medical reports and lab results, and then sat back in her chair. "This is enough to open an investigation," she said. "But to build a case that will hold up in court, we need more. We need to catch her in the act." She laid out a plan. They would install hidden cameras in my brother's home. They would have an undercover officer pose as a new housekeeper to monitor Lauren's activities. And most importantly, Daniel would have to go home and pretend nothing had changed. That was the hardest part. My brother looked at me with fear in his eyes. "You want me to go back there? To live with her like everything's normal?" I took his hands in mine. "You won't eat or drink anything she prepares. We'll make sure of that. You'll bring food from outside, make excuses, and you won't be alone. The police will be watching. I'll be watching." He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. "For justice," he said, "for the truth." Before he was discharged, the doctors gave him strict instructions. They also provided him with supplements that would help counteract any additional exposure. Daniel was terrified, but he was also angry. The betrayal had lit a fire in him that I had never seen before. For the next 2 weeks, life became a carefully orchestrated performance. Daniel went home and told Lauren that the doctors had found a stomach ulcer, nothing serious. He said they had prescribed medication and a special diet. Lauren was sympathetic, attentive, loving. She offered to prepare bland meals for him, soups and rice that would be easy on his stomach. But Daniel refused everything she made. He blamed the new diet, said he had to follow a specific meal plan from the hospital. He ate protein bars and takeout, always making sure to throw away the containers so she wouldn't see what he was really consuming. Lauren's eyes narrowed sometimes when he refused her cooking, but she never pushed too hard. Meanwhile, I moved into a hotel in Austin to be closer to my brother. Every day, I checked in with Detective Foster. The hidden cameras had been installed in the kitchen, the living room, and the master bedroom. The undercover officer, a young woman named Maria, had been hired as a cleaning lady and was in the house 3 times a week. The footage from the first week showed nothing unusual. Lauren cooked, cleaned, went to her yoga classes, and talked on the phone with friends. She seemed like any normal suburban wife. I started to wonder if we were wrong, if there was some other explanation we had missed. Then, on the 9th day, everything changed. I was sitting in Detective Foster's office, reviewing footage on a laptop, when we saw it. Lauren was in the kitchen, alone, preparing a pot of soup for Daniel's lunch. She glanced around, almost casually, and then reached into her purse. She pulled out a small glass vial, unscrewed the cap, and poured a white powder into the soup. Her movements were calm, practiced, like she had done it 100 times before. My blood ran cold. Seeing it on video, seeing her actually do it, made it real in a way that nothing else had. This woman, who had smiled at me at family dinners, who had hugged me at Christmas, who had called me her sister, was a monster. "That's our evidence," Detective Foster said quietly. "But let's see if she leads us to her source. We need to know where she's getting the poison." Over the next few days, the police tracked Lauren's movements. They discovered that she had been ordering thallium sulfate from an overseas supplier using a fake name and a P.O. box in a neighboring town. She had done her research, found a substance that was hard to detect and slow-acting, and had been methodically poisoning my brother for almost a year. But why? I kept asking myself. What could possibly drive her to do this? The answer came from an unexpected source. My father called me one evening, his voice heavy with emotion. He told me that he and my mother had been planning to announce something at Thanksgiving. They were getting older, and they wanted to transfer ownership of the family ranch and their investment properties to Daniel and me. The estate was worth several $1,000,000. They had mentioned this to Lauren months ago, he said, asking her to keep it quiet until the official announcement. My father's voice broke. She was so happy, so grateful. She said she and Daniel would take such good care of everything. That's when I understood. Lauren wasn't just trying to kill my brother. She was trying to become a widow before the inheritance was finalized. As Daniel's surviving spouse, she would be entitled to his entire share. And with him gone, she would have years to work on my elderly parents, perhaps becoming the sole beneficiary of everything they owned. The depth of her calculation made me sick to my stomach. She had planned this for months, maybe years. Every loving gesture, every home-cooked meal, every tender moment had been part of a long con. My brother was nothing to her but an obstacle between her and a fortune. Detective Foster agreed that we had enough evidence for an arrest, but she wanted to make the case airtight. She suggested a final operation, something that would get Lauren to confess. We came up with a plan. My parents would announce, loudly and publicly, that they had decided to donate the majority of their estate to charity, a foundation for underprivileged youth, something that would generate good press and leave very little for the children to inherit. We would stage this announcement at a family dinner, making sure Lauren heard every word. The dinner was held at my parents' house the following Saturday. I watched Lauren's face as my father made the announcement. Her smile never wavered, but I saw her knuckles go white as she gripped her wine glass. She excused herself to the bathroom, and I followed at a distance. Through the door, I heard her on the phone, her voice a harsh whisper. "We have to move faster," she said. "They're giving it all away. I don't have time to wait anymore." I pressed record on my phone, capturing every word. When she came out, I was waiting in the hallway, pretending to look at old family photos. "Everything okay?" I asked sweetly. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just checking in with a friend." The next morning, Daniel collapsed at home. It was planned, of course, carefully coordinated with the police and the hospital. He clutched his chest, gasped for breath, and fell to the floor. Lauren screamed and called 911, playing the role of the terrified wife. At the hospital, we took it one step further. Dr. Webb, who was in on the plan, came out to the waiting room where Lauren was pacing. He told her that Daniel had suffered a massive cardiac event and hadn't survived. He delivered the news with convincing gravity, and I watched my sister-in-law's reaction from across the room. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. But when she lowered her hands for just a moment, thinking no one was watching, I saw it. A flash of relief. A tiny smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared. I walked over to her and put my arms around her. She cried into my shoulder, her voice breaking as she said all the right things. How much she loved him, how she couldn't believe he was gone, how she didn't know how she would go on. The doctors asked if she wanted to see the body, and she nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I led her to the room where Daniel lay on a bed, covered with a white sheet up to his chest. His eyes were closed, his face pale. The heart monitor beside him showed a flat line. Lauren approached slowly. She reached out and touched his face, her expression shifting from grief to something else, something calculating. She leaned in close and whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it, "I told you I'd get everything." And then my brother opened his eyes. Lauren stumbled backward. A scream caught in her throat. Her face went white, her eyes wild with terror. She looked at me, then at the door, where Detective Foster was entering with 2 officers. "No," she gasped. "This isn't real. This can't be happening." Daniel sat up slowly, his gaze fixed on the woman he had loved. "I heard everything, Lauren," he said, his voice breaking. "I heard what you just said." "It was just a joke," she stammered, backing toward the wall. "I didn't mean it. I was just surprised." Detective Foster stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Lauren Mitchell, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Daniel Mitchell. You have the right to remain silent." As the officers moved to handcuff her, Lauren's composure shattered completely. She screamed, thrashing against them. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she shouted. "I deserved that money. I spent 8 years taking care of him, 8 years being the perfect wife." The officers led her away, her screams echoing down the hospital corridor. I stood there, trembling, as Daniel got off the bed and came to stand beside me. We watched her disappear around the corner, and then my brother broke down. I held him as he cried, feeling his whole body shake with grief and relief and anger. I couldn't find words to comfort him, because there were no words for something like this. The woman he had built his life with, the woman he had trusted completely, had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. At the police station, Lauren eventually confessed everything. She told the detectives how she had researched untraceable poisons, how she had found a supplier online, how she had been adding thallium to my brother's coffee and food for nearly a year. She had been patient, careful, waiting for him to get just sick enough that his eventual death would seem like a tragic illness. When they asked about an accomplice, she laughed bitterly. "Why would I share?" she said. "The whole point was to keep everything for myself." The investigation revealed that she had a history of financial fraud, something none of us had known. She had been deeply in debt when she met my brother, and she had seen him as her ticket to a better life. Every moment of their marriage had been a performance, a long game to secure the fortune she believed she deserved. Daniel's recovery took months. The chelation therapy helped flush the remaining poison from his system, but the emotional scars ran deeper. He sold the house they had shared and moved into a small apartment in Dallas to be closer to me. Some days he was angry. Other days, he blamed himself for not seeing the signs. I reminded him, again and again, that none of it was his fault. My parents were devastated. They blamed themselves for ever mentioning the inheritance to Lauren, for putting the idea in her head. I told them the same thing I told Daniel. Evil people find their own reasons. We can't blame ourselves for the darkness in someone else's heart. 6 months later, Lauren was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. I sat in the courtroom when the verdict was read, watching her face go blank as the judge pronounced her fate. She didn't look at us. She didn't say a word. Afterward, Daniel and I walked out into the Texas sunshine together. The air smelled like spring, like new beginnings. He put his arm around me and said something I'll never forget. "You saved my life, Rebecca. If you hadn't taken that sip of coffee, if Nina hadn't noticed something was wrong, I'd be dead right now. I owe you everything." I looked up at him, at my brother who had been through hell and come out the other side. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You're my family. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you." We walked to my car in silence, and as we drove away from the courthouse, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about the lesson that this nightmare had taught me. Trust is precious, and it should never be given blindly, not even to the people who seem to love us most. I also thought about Nina, my assistant manager who had recognized the danger when no one else did. She had followed her instincts, spoken up even when it seemed crazy, and that act of courage had saved my brother's life. I made a mental note to give her a raise, and maybe a promotion. That evening, the whole family gathered at my parents' ranch for dinner. It was the first time we had all been together since the trial ended. My father grilled steaks, my mother made her famous potato salad, and Daniel actually ate seconds for the first time in over a year. As the sun set over the Texas hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I looked around at the people I loved. We had been broken, but we were healing. We had been betrayed, but we were stronger. And we were still here, still together, still a family. Daniel raised his glass of iced tea. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm grateful," he said. "Not for what happened, but for all of you. For not giving up on me. For fighting for the truth." My mother wiped tears from her eyes. My father cleared his throat, too emotional to speak, and I smiled, raising my own glass. "To family," I said. "The real kind. The kind that never lets you down." We clinked our glasses together, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The story I've shared with you today isn't just about one woman's evil. It's about the power of paying attention, of trusting your instincts, of fighting for the people you love. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore the signs. Don't dismiss your gut feelings. And never, ever underestimate what someone is capable of when money is involved. I think about Lauren sometimes, sitting in her prison cell, with nothing but time to reflect on the choices she made. She wanted everything, and she ended up with nothing. That's what greed does. It promises the world and delivers destruction. As for my brother, he's doing better every day. He started dating again recently, a kind woman from his church who knows his whole story and loves him anyway. My parents finally made that announcement about their estate, but this time, they left nothing to chance. The inheritance goes directly to Daniel and me, with ironclad provisions to protect it from anyone who might try to take advantage. I've learned that you can't control what other people do. You can only control how you respond. And when someone you trust turns out to be your worst enemy, the only thing you can do is survive, heal, and keep moving forward. I genuinely want to know what you think. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have trusted your instincts like Nina did? Would you have been brave enough to confront the truth? Tell me in the comments. Every story, every perspective might help someone else who's going through something similar. God bless you all. And remember, the people who truly love you will always show it through their actions, not just their words. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and hold your family close. Thank you for staying until the end.